I'm Brian Foster, and this is the Grindhouse Institute. On each episode of this podcast, Jeremy Floyd and I program and discuss a double or triple feature movie night. Each of the movies share common themes, and we discuss them here. We're happy you could join us for today's film block that will be the first of a three-part series we call ZombiEvolution. Merriam-Webster defines the word zombie as a mixed drink made of several kinds of rum, liqueur, and fruit juice. Since this podcast has never focused on mixing cocktails, we'll leave that to Distinguished Spirits on YouTube. Jeremy and I will be discussing the zombie as a will-less and speechless human held to have died and been supernaturally reanimated. Zombies, flesh eaters, the walking dead, ghouls, whatever you may call them, have had an evolution during their time on the silver screen. Originally thought of as an automaton, a robot-like human who was controlled by a mystical puppet master, the reanimated dead have since taken on many forms and in turn several different origin stories. Today's Grindhouse Institute block is a triple feature. The 1932 Bela Lugosi film White Zombie, 1964's The Last Man on Earth starring Vincent Price, and 1968's Night of the Living Dead from horror auteur George A. Romero. All is fair in love and war is taken to a whole new level when a stately aristocrat will do anything to lure a beautiful woman away from her soon-to-be husband, including enlisting the help of a voodoo master who ultimately transforms the woman into a soulless husk. White Zombie stars Bela Lugosi in his second film after his monumental role as the evil Count Dracula. When a plague is unleashed on the world, Earth's infected population have been transformed into the children of the night. Vincent Price is brilliant as the one man on Earth who is immune to the virus yet needs to fight day after day to maintain his sanity from this lonely world, and night after night to maintain his safety from the never-ending horde of vampiric infected. They're coming to get you, Barbara. After watching her brother get killed by a crazed lunatic, Barbara hides in a deserted farmhouse. There she finds other survivors, including Ben, played marvelously by Dwayne Jones, who works to lead the group in protecting themselves and surviving the Night of the Living Dead. Thank you for listening to the Grindhouse Institute. Please enjoy.
Why did you drive like that, you fool? We might have been killed.
Worse than that, monsieur. We might have been caught.
Caught? By whom? Those men you spoke to?
They are not men, monsieur. They are dead bodies.
Dead?
Yes, monsieur. Zombies. The living dead.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Grindhouse Institute. I'm Brian Foster. This is Jeremy Floyd. We are going to be hello, sorry. I jumped right over your hello there. That's my fault. By the way, I love your shirt, Jeremy. We are doing this from a Google Hangout right now, and Jeremy has a They Live shirt on, and it is amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Oh wow, can you like tilt down or something so we can see? Yeah, let's show the whole chest. There it is. If you guys have seen They Live, that will definitely be one of the choices that we watch on this show for sure. When we do the massive John Carpenter block or any politically charged movie, I guess, with homeless people and aliens. So welcome again. We are going to be talking about three films in a genre that I particularly love so much, the zombie genre. And in fact, we are talking about one of the films, at least today. We're talking about the first time in history that zombies were technically on film or in the movies and called zombies. But Jeremy has a little bit more insight into that, so I'll let him take over.
Yeah. White Zombie, 1932, the Bela Lugosi movie, made sort of directly after Dracula.
Right after Dracula, right? This was like his second picture, and he was a big star at this point.
Yeah, exactly. White Zombie was the first time that zombies were introduced to the movies. White Zombie was based off of a stage play, which was an adaptation of W.B. Seabrook's travel log. It was supposedly all nonfiction. a very, big asterisk on that one. His accounts are pretty dubious. But, this guy...
This is a true story.
In the late 20s... 1929 was Magic Island, which is Seabrook's book. Went to Haiti and wrote a book on his account. And in that book, which became very popular, the sort of concept of zombies was introduced into the popular culture and American lexicon. Also, at the time, the U.S. had occupied Haiti, and so there was a lot of propaganda in the papers about how dangerous and vile things were in Haiti.
But also there was tourism there at that point then too, right? Like people started going there.
I don't know about that part, but
I feel like that's kind of like the origin of this story. This couple goes to this foreign land that is pretty new to the rest of the world, or at least America, to go get married.
Exactly, and they're being introduced to all of these, all of these local customs. Like it starts off in the very, very, very beginning with them seeing a body being buried in the middle of the road in order so that it won't be dug up and turned into zombies later on. But so this movie was definitely the first time zombies were formally introduced into cinema, which was also again shortly after it was introduced into the English language more or less, and pop culture for sure. With Seabrook's book, which again this is sort of loosely inspired by, I don't know.
So the three movies that we're talking about are White Zombie from 1932, The Last Man on Earth, is that 54?
64.
64, I'm sorry. And then Night of the Living Dead, is that 68, 69?
68, yeah.
68, yeah. So that's like the end of Vietnam. So we're like at the beginning and end between those two films of Vietnam, or not the middle and the end of Vietnam at that point?
Well, yeah, it depends on when you
I
start counting.
Right, yes.
But, yeah. Well, no, I mean, 1968 was, as we'll maybe get to into the movie, it was definitely a very turbulent time, and a lot of world-changing events were happening then, and I'm sure perhaps it may not have been wholly intentional, but in coming out in that time, the movie seemed to very much reflect that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Particularly with the ending and everything else, like the whole world seeming to be run over with this new phenomenon, in the movie, also kind of reflected what felt like at the time. So.
That goes with the two films, right? That goes with The Last Man on Earth, and that goes along with Night of the Living Dead, and that also goes with 2020, this year. Watching these films, Night of the Living Dead I've seen so many times, so it was kind of kind of like a half-assed watch, I have to admit that, because it was just kind of on in the background.
Right. Mostly
because that's all I watched when I was growing up as a kid. But The Last Man on Earth, this was the first time I saw that, but when they were discussing the virus that could have been airborne, and they were wondering how it was spreading so fast and everything, and I'm like, Jesus, is this hitting really close to home at this point?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Morgan, we're gonna kill you. I mean, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that evolution and in White Zombie.
Yeah. So real quick, I just wanted to say, like, the idea is, okay, so this is the first part of our zombie evolution.
Yeah.
The next part is we're going to do, Dawn of the Dead and Zombie 2 or whatever the hell they called it, depending on which country you're in, which became another watershed of how zombies were created or portrayed. And then in 85, with Day of the Dead and Return of the Living Dead, in which, zombies had kind of like gone from what they were in White Zombie to sort of their final form that they are today, more or less.
I mean, they were slaves in White Zombie. I think we should they were manipulated humans at this point through drugs that would turn them into walking corpses that would basically follow, which they never say his name, but his name's Murder, the Bela Lugosi's character.
Okay. You know, it's funny. I didn't even remember that.
Yeah, they never said his name, and I looked up on IMDb what his name was, and it's just some ridiculous name, very on the nose, like
Murder legendary.
Yeah, legendary murder. It's like, oh, okay, good. But anyway, they were basically his worker bees. They would follow everything he did, and they were working in that mill, just like robots.
Well, yeah. So the idea was that there was this early version of what a zombie was, which is, as you were describing, this automaton, this worker bee, a worker who has absolutely no
soul,
thoughts of their own, or ability to direct themselves. They are, puppeteered by, a puppet master, shall we say. And, eventually by the end of this, by sort of the mid 80s, this concept has been totally changed into a walking, rotting corpse that can infect you by biting you, and
and we really don't know how they started. There's really no explanation as to how they rose from the dead. It's just kind of a freak occurrence one day.
Yeah, or there's various explanations. I
sure,
say.
A comet was passing by that left radiation, and but that was even in that. So talking about Night of the Living Dead, when they didn't give an explanation as to why, even that radio report is kind of conjecture at that point. They don't know.
That's true.
The world doesn't know what it is, and these were all just theories. And even when you get to Dawn, the direct sequel to Night, you still don't know, and they still don't know. All they need to do is contain this issue. So I'm going to have to say that as a modern viewer of movies, I would say that White Zombie has lost a lot of its edge, and I'm sure it was pretty creepy back in the day, but there is a lot. I mean, first of all, it's a short movie, but it felt very long.
I was just about to say that,
slow prodder. It didn't take me a while to get through it. It felt like it took me a while to get through it.
Yeah.
And all in all, I thought it was a good story. It could have been told in a half an hour.
Well, it's funny. So the movie is like what, 62 minutes or something?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But it feels like the longest movie on the list here. And it's has a lot to do with how everyone pauses and everyone slowly reacts, and it's
very
part of it,
very staged.
A little
stagey.
bit is that it's coming out of the silent era, and the like hand to the lip, like gasp.
This move when the fiance was like, he's getting on my girl.
Yeah, hands on the hips. I don't think so, mister.
What are you doing there?
But there actually, there was, despite its like pacing issues, I did enjoy the movie.
Absolutely. I thought Bela Lugosi's performance is fine. I can, and I watched Ed Wood a lot growing up, so hearing about the feud between him and Karloff was interesting. But
Karloff, sidekick.
Karloff was a fuck you.
Karloff does not deserve to smell my shit.
Karloff was a better actor. Karloff could portray a bunch of different roles when Lugosi kept doing Dracula, I feel. And I feel like even in this one, he had the same, that theatrical moniker that Dracula, I mean, it's so successful with someone like Dracula, a romantic monster. But in this one, he's more of a mad scientist, puppeteer.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of not clear, I guess, where his powers or whatever came from, but he was mixing potions and stuff.
Well, he was saying that
was it magic or was it
one of his
science?
It's drugs. It's science, yeah. And he even says that, but or the doctor says that when he's discussing with the fiance. But what was interesting to me was that the zombies that Bela Lugosi was using, they were all his old enemies. And his main army of zombies were people that have wronged him in life, and this is how he kind of got back at him. I'm like, Jesus, what revenge is to? I'm gonna drug you till you're basically dead, and now you're gonna do everything I say for the rest of your natural life. I guess as you
until
rot,
your body gives out or whatever.
Exactly. But I thought that was an interesting point in there, and one of the conversations that he has really struck me as being important to the storyline was, well, what if What if all of these zombies all of a sudden got their souls back? And literally he said, they would tear me apart, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's like, that would have been a great ending, right? Like all of a sudden they snapped to and they took him out. And that's what I was kind of thinking would happen, not knowing the ending of the film.
Yeah, I guess that does kind of happen in a way because, the one guy who's in the process of converting.
And he knocks him off the side of the castle there.
Knocks him off, the Gothic, wind-swept castle.
It's pretty brutal. They showed the body hitting the water and it was clearly a dummy, but it was hitting the ground and floating away.
That's true. I guess there was a couple places where you really knew that this movie was pre-code, and I'd say that was one of them. At one point they, fire a gun at the sort of Tor Johnson with the wrestler zombie.
The assassin, he was like a killer, like an executioner, he said, that in his former life.
Okay.
That's how he described it.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm like, Jesus, that guy looks like a badass.
Yeah, exactly.
Tor Johnson.
That circus freak kind of look.
Absolutely.
But he, they fired a gun and then you saw the bullet hole.
Yeah, that's right. That cut to that's
come in.
Right.
It wasn't just kind of grabbing your stomach and falling over.
But it didn't affect him, right? Because he's dead.
Yeah,
they didn't establish that rule till kind of late in the film, I think.
Right. That bullets wouldn't have any sort of physical, even if you didn't feel the pain, they didn't have any physical stopping power in any way. Yeah, no problem. Yep, it's just a thing that happens. But also in terms of pre-code, there was the scene where the bride was getting dressed or whatever, and she was in her underwear basically. And,
yeah.
Anyway, I am sure pretty scandalous for the time.
Absolutely.
What was interesting was that as stilted as the performances were, that was something that the movie was sort of roundly criticized for, and yet the movie was super popular at the time. So I was digging through old newspapers and stuff for, looking up zombie stuff for my cocktail show, and what's crazy is looking at the newspaper accounts. You'd find screenings of White Zombie 10 years later, 1942.
Right.
There'd be probably only one per city, but there'd be one in every city throughout the year. It's you could find the thing playing, for a long time. So it definitely had some staying power with audiences, but you kind of have to take it on its own terms. I think a modern audience could probably get through Last Man on Earth and Night of the Living Dead. It's classic for a reason.
I think it holds up.
I think it totally holds up, but I could see that maybe the opening scene with "They're Coming to Get You, Barbara," having to give it a little leeway before it really starts to hook you for a modern audience. But White Zombie, that one would be tough for someone who's not I'm going to study this movie. It's I'm going to sit down and enjoy it. It would be definitely harder for a modern audience to do.
I agree. Although I feel like the very beginning, the first 30 seconds or so of White Zombie is pretty awesome. It's got that chanting tribal song playing. I looked that up. It's El Imperio del Mal.
Yeah, because it's a funeral in the middle of the road.
Yeah, and it's got a really cool graphic of White Zombie coming up on the screen, and I was like, this is pretty stylish. And then throughout the film, they used some pretty ingenious cinematic effects and techniques. Split screens, the eyes that were, peering over the camera or over the picture, and I thought that was interesting. But
no, exactly. There's a lot of really great German expressionist,
absolutely,
kind of cinematography. The scene where they go into the sugar mill, and
creepy.
He's got his army of slaves. They are dumping the cane into this giant. Mill.
The one falls in.
Yeah, the one kind of trips and falls into it.
No reaction.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah,
no one reacts. But I got that. Whoa, ooh, Jesus.
Another gruesome thing for the time, right? I know they didn't show it, but that was you could put that together because they just showed the sticks of the sugarcane being crunched and destroyed,
right.
And then this dude just falls in there. what the hell happened to his bones? You know, like he's
Yeah.
just mangled at this point.
Right, and it's like, you know, that creepy noise of the rusty grinding mill, and yeah, how
Yes.
that none of the zombie workers stop, and it's, you know, it's calls to mind, you know, it's like the Amazon factory of its day, you know, just
There you
keep
go.
going, keep going.
Get him out the door. But
Yeah.
the lack of expression on all their faces was definitely a motif across all of the undead in this film, and that was, I think, the big differentiator of this one was they're the same person, they're who you remember, but without the soul, without the emotion, without the love, and any sort of any of that
The humanity.
intangible that's associated with the person, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the husk and the animated corpse or whatever. Yeah.
Well, let's go on to The Last Man, but I did want to say one more thing about White Zombie.
Yeah.
I feel like of all these films, this one needs a remake. And I feel like,
Yeah.
especially today, I think someone like Jordan Peele that would be sensitive to some of the subject matter in a film like this, especially when you look deep into what this is really about, I think he could nail this movie. And I would love to see a new version of this with updated visuals and updated cinematography and acting. I think that this would be a great one to see again.
Yeah, I guess, you know, even though there's only, like you were saying earlier, like, you know, 30 to 40 minutes worth of plot in the movie, you know, I guess you could expand it a little more. But like what was in there was, you know, pretty, you know, diabolical, and and it still resonated. You know, the guy.
Beaumont is the biggest creep on the fucking planet, man. This guy's willing to take this girl's soul just to be with this girl, like, and
Right.
ruin this other guy's life.
Right, exactly, and he wasn't even sort of the main villain. You know, it's like he
He became the crony in a way.
the level of villainy went pretty deep in the movie. So at least that side of it kind of still holds up.
Lugosi was after the girl from the beginning, which again felt like a lot of Dracula to me. You know, Harker bringing Mina in a way, and then this one. But you know, he had the scarf, and he kind of tucked it away in his jacket like it was really important to him when he was discussing with Beaumont. And obviously, there was this. He had a plot within a plot to try to get this girl and use this guy as
himself,
kind of
yeah.
that bridge. Yeah. But I would like to bring up next up, Last Man on Earth. I really, really enjoyed this film a lot.
Oh, good. Yeah.
This
Same.
one, I mean, people were like, "Oh, Night of the Living Dead took some inspiration from this." I would say carbon copy in some instances. Music and shots, and especially the setup of everything when the movie was still on sticks. Night of the Living Dead, I mean, you know, when it still had a little bit of, you know, composure before it turned into documentary zombies coming into your household. But I don't think this movie would have been Last Man on Earth. I mean, I don't think it would be as successful without Vincent Price. I think he nailed the madness of this person, last person on Earth.
Yeah, and he played a very un-Vincent Price role in this one. He didn't have his usual, I don't know what, irony and you know, composure. He was very human in the movie.
Very much
which
so.
is interesting.
And, you know, not very athletic. Terrible at throwing things and terrible at throwing punches. So I guess he's more of a theatrical actor.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, you know, and it's like, well, what would a egghead scientist do in this situation? Well, he's not going to be the World War Z, you know, machine gun toting badass.
Not Will Smith
and scientist.
Yeah, Will
you know,
Smith,
or
Robert Neville.
Either the Will Smith, I Am Legend, or World War Z, Brad Pitt. Both, you know, handy with an assault rifle and with you know, lab technicians or whatever.
If you look at some of the stills from Omega Man, the Charlton Heston remake of this, or based on the book, I understand, but you know, the other remake of this book, he's got some sort of sniper rifle with a scope on it, and then with like this red beam that he can like shine on the whatever they are in that movie, ghouls,
the monsters.
But yeah, this one he felt genuinely vulnerable. However, he kind of accepted his vulnerability And I thought that was a cool mix. Even when they were banging through the window trying to get in night after night, he found a way to fall asleep and like find comfort in his own home, even while all that shit was going on. Which,
Yeah.
like watching it, I felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Morgan.
Yeah.
That
Exactly.
I thought it was great that, these zombies or these vampires, which, they hinted at but never really said. I guess they did say it, but they didn't really come out clearly and say it. I like that they still had their voices. I think that made them scary.
Yeah, that was interesting. So this movie, would kind of seem like the odd man out in both, this episode and then also, through the rest of the little series we're doing here. Except for the fact that, like, you can, as you mentioned, Romero seemed very inspired by this movie in particular. The Richard Matheson book, I Am Legend, that it was based on. The monsters were, more vampire-like, more obviously vampires.
They drank blood.
They weren't lumbering and slow.
They were fast, yeah.
Yeah, and that there was like a really interesting detail that he, in his neighborhood, he burned down all the houses around him so they couldn't come in, through, I don't know, jump over the roof or whatever. So he'd have to just defend at the bottom. Well, and I don't think they did that in the movie, but
oh, I see.
And also in the movie, the monsters were, more of what we think of as zombie-like. They were, lumbering and slow, and like, barely able to lift their own arms to slap the door and, say Morgan and all this stuff. Whereas, in the book they were, sort of fully animated and
athletic and fast. And
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I Am Legend probably hit that a little bit more accurately to the book, because those things were fast and they traveled in packs. Oh, this is a disagreement phase.
Yeah, that's the...
I don't think I've ever felt such disagreement from you in my life. You don't like this movie, I Am Legend, huh?
No, I hated it. But, but, the idea was that, like, in the 2007 Will Smith version, Big Willie style got the title I Am Legend because he created the cure or whatever. In the book and in sort of The Last Man on Earth, it was the idea that this guy, the Vincent Price character, was going around hunting these vampires all day long, trying to exterminate them. And, he was, as it turns out in the last page, like the bad guy.
He was killing all of their people.
He was what this new world saw as like the most evil and terrifying person, and like that's why in the end of this movie, after they finally corner him and kill him, the woman comes by that crying baby and she's like, it's all right, he's gone, he won't be able to terrorize us anymore. And the ending of the book was fascinating. It's definitely worth a read just for that. Although I have to say this movie did come pretty close to the idea that was embodied in the ending of the book, which is what the title was supposed to be about. Like the way they get there is a little different. But
feels like that the way they got there was a little thrown in. She just kind of, I know she was spying on him, but she just was walking toward him at one point, and he's like, "Stop! Don't leave!" And
yeah.
But there was not a whole lot there.
Yeah, they didn't quite give that part of the story enough context to like get you to then like feel the surprise with the character. It's like, this is very weird. Everything about this doesn't make sense. You were very suspicious of it as you're watching it, where you should have been more in his mindset of like able to see and like, okay, I guess this could make sense. Oh, there was another survivor. It wasn't just me. Blah blah blah. But the idea was that in the end, like he realizes that to all of these new people that he was seen as monsters, he was the monster. He was a legend that they were fighting. He was the Dracula in that.
Yeah, because they said that some of the people that he'd pick up from the side of the road as he's clearing out the dead and throwing them into that fire pit, those were actually living people that were their friends and like their family, and they were he was just going around picking them up in his car and killing people.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
That was a great twist that I did not see coming. I really enjoyed that piece of the story.
oh, cool. So, wait, are you talking about in the book or in the
No,
movie?
in the movie when
Uh-huh.
we find out that this woman is actually from a camp of vampires that can now, I guess, deal with the sunlight and things like that because they found more of
she
a
had
cure than he ever found.
Kind of a potion or something, yeah.
Yeah.
Did they ever describe them as vampires in the movie?
Yeah, so there's in the flashback scene when we're so yeah, the main zombie that's always after him was his, good friend and colleague that he worked with in the lab. And
Right.
at one point he said,
He was Johnny with the glove.
exactly, yeah, right. But he said, he's like, these are vampires, like from what we can describe of them, like this is a very vampiric thing that we're talking about, but they didn't so much as come out and call them vampires. But with the garlic, the mirrors, the crosses all over, the wooden stakes,
Yeah.
everything kind of led to that.
Well, and supposedly the reason Vincent Price wasn't affected by any of this stuff was he had been bitten by a bat, and so that's sort of
The vampiric blood mixed with my own. It's like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. I mean, I thought that was a pretty good explanation, but it didn't try to explain it away. It's just like his theory. He never claimed that as being fact.
Yeah, and that's something that like I find in Stephen King stories he often does so well, which is that like instead of creating an objective explanation as to how these things are happening, people come up with sort of their own theory on it, and it seems very plausible, but it's also has the wiggle room to not be that thing.
It's still cosmic. It's still bigger than we understand.
Right, exactly. Which also has its own level of that unknown becomes very scary in and of itself. But yeah, so I like this movie. There were so many connections or perhaps homages that Romero used. Like maybe that Johnny connection. The guy was boarded up in his house. He often was using like fire to kill the zombies. Like the zombies were or whatever the ghouls were attacking Vincent Price's car, and like all of the ghouls were sort of lumbering. They were assaulting his homestead.
But using weapons, like that was like a step above the. Although the first cemetery zombie in Night of the Living Dead uses the rock to get into her car. That's
true. Yeah.
That's really the only use of tools that they use in that movie. But in Last Man on Earth, they had boards. It felt like they had actual weapons with them, or they knew how to use them, and were using that as leverage to try to get into this house night after night.
Right,
for 3 straight years, apparently.
Yeah.
Jesus. Like, that's torture. And I think that's why I really enjoyed this movie, is I felt truly tortured, and I felt like I was alone with him. And every time there was those sounds of, Morgan, or somebody trying to break in, and he's just kind of sitting there smoking cigarettes and having a drink, and it's like, this is your new life, and you kind of feel that with him.
Yeah. Well, I think particularly at this moment, it has a lot of that resonance. I mean, as you were saying, the idea that this thing was an airborne disease, and that that they didn't know where it was coming from or how to combat it, or what the ways of taking care of it were. And then you see in this really like long flashback section of the movie how Morgan was looking for his daughter, and there was just a group of MPs with a dump truck, like unloading bodies into this burning pit,
bags of bodies.
And he's like, I think my daughter's in there. Like a lot of people's daughters in there, kid,
including my own. He goes, including my own, sir.
Yeah.
It's like, Jesus, dude.
God.
And he seemed pretty calm about it.
How much did that remind you in a way of like New York in April, when they were just like
exactly. That's exactly
dumping bodies by the cartload onto that island or whatever.
Jesus.
And anyway, so I think particularly at this given second, like this movie has this extra layer of resonance. Despite some of the let's say production shortcomings, with like the very long sequence that was clearly shot MOS, and they had to kind of dub everything in later.
It's an Italian film. And
yeah,
no one was speaking English except for Vincent Price. Yeah, or at least his own English, I should say. But like it's fun. It's crazy to see that. I didn't expect to see that many Italian names when I was watching the credits. It felt like I was watching a giallo from Dario Argento or something, which we're gonna get to for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so the ending, I thought was great. And I think it was very strong of them to kill off the protagonist. I know it, unlike Psycho, that happened within the first 15 minutes. But in this version, or in this film, I like that we really led up to a growth of this character through who he is now, where he came from, or how he got to this point. Mm-hmm. A theory as to why he was the only one left on Earth, and then into this. Well, like they said in The Dark Knight, if you live long enough, you go from the hero to becoming the villain. And in many ways, that's what he did. He wasn't a legend in the positive sense. He was this monster in this community of people because they were the majority at this point. And so they ran the world in a way. And he was this mythical creature that was killing them off, by the truckload, literally. And I guess to bring that up, there was some little facts I found that Vincent Price, he refused to move around dummies because he wanted it to be realistic. So he was literally lifting people. And as you see, he's kind of careful to lift dead bodies into the car as if he really would be. But he's like being very gentle with them. But, added a sense of realism. I thought that was interesting and also extremely grotesque.
Yeah. How funny was it that... speaking of the lifting the dead bodies, I remember like at one point he put one in the trunk and it was kind of moving around a little bit.
Yeah.
But he was driving around, I don't know what, this like, Ecto 1 hearse, and, always had the
exactly
back
what
open.
I thought. I was like, what'd you pay for this one? Oh, $7,800. That's exactly what I thought. I'm like, is that a hearse? He's like, no, it's more of a station wagon. He even says that like later on when he goes car shopping. Right. And I thought that was a great scene too. He's like, should I take this Ferrari or should I take this more practical car?
Yeah, exactly. How many bodies are going to be able to haul around in the Ferrari? It's funny that they shot it in Italy, so the Ferrari is a domestic car there. And
this state-of-the-art station wagon from America.
Yeah.
From Detroit. Yeah, I thought this was a fantastic movie. And again, the performances were great. Although, there were some things that were missing, like you said, plot points and such, but I don't think it totally needed it, and I really don't think it needed the narrative or the voiceover narration. I feel like this movie could have really benefited from just visuals, and it's strong visually. It's very clear what they're trying to get at. Especially like you mentioned the grid on the map as he's taking out section by section or street by street. I thought that was really interesting. And like, that was a really cool shot of him. And it's basically showing his timeline along with the calendars and the 3 years that go by. And he's making his own calendars at this point because they're not printing any new ones, obviously. Right. Yeah. Very neat. I mean, really good production design. It was like a complete mise en scène, if you will. Like everything in that scene had something to do with that character and storyline.
Well, and that was what was, I think maybe the first, 25 minutes of the movie was sort of captured what was so fascinating about the book, which was that, they would go into great detail as to what his day-to-day was like and how he, how would he get the stakes? And then how would he, systematically go, and what would he do when he gets there? And like, how does he survive the night? And all these things. And, in the book, he's in total isolation. Again, also feelings of 2020 there. And he's in this situation where he hasn't had any contact with anything. And in the book he like finds this dog, and it was this long process of him trying to like get the dog to not be afraid of him, and so they kind of glossed over that in the movie. But there's this whole moment where it's like heartbreaking that he finds this dog and gets finally has like a companion.
Yeah.
And then then later he has a similar interaction with that woman, and like, but in the book it's a little more drawn out, and they don't spend a whole lot of time with like wondering how we got here, and in the movie they spend a long time in this extremely long flashback that kind of takes up a big chunk of the middle of the movie, but instead they focus on sort of his day-to-day, and then so that when you're seeing the dog and like having him chase after the dog, you as the audience really want him to get the dog, and and so you're in more of his mindset, and there aren't these little like corner cuttings with like how well that was fast that he just accepted that this person was there and chased after her, and then it turns out she's not a human, and that part of the movie could have used a little more work to get it to work, but just sort of overall I totally agree. I really enjoyed it, and it at least captured the essence of what the ending of this movie was supposed to be, and like it's that sort of like horror, capper on the end that like, wait a minute, this whole time, his perspective wasn't what the rest of the world's perspective was,
Right. And at the ending, the monsters, or at least who we think are the monsters throughout the entire film, are the triumphant victors, and
they slew the monster. Yeah.
They've reclaimed their world, right, from this other monster. And I thought, honestly, I did not expect that from the storyline, and I thought I was blown away by that. I thought that was incredibly cool, and I'm unsure why they skipped that in like the later reincarnations of this film. I feel like that's a very important factor, especially considering the title of the book that it's based on.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's like
that's kind of what I was saying a minute ago. It's like the Will Smith version, like they flip the meaning of what I Am Legend is supposed to mean.
Right. They made because he was a legend.
Like, I am the savior of humanity. And, perhaps that was done for the sort of Hollywood happy ending type of thing, or perhaps the star's ego got in the way there. Who knows?
I think that a combination, but aren't we beyond the happy ending shit in movies? Like I feel like some of the most successful movies, in my opinion, maybe the top 100 of my favorite movies, most of them have a shitty ending. A shitty ending in terms of like the hero not making it, or everyone in the camp not making it, or everyone at the farmhouse not making it except for one. I think that's I don't think a good ending makes sense for a movie like this, or at least the prototypical happy ending. This is a happy ending for the people that it was an unexpected happy ending for the people that we didn't expect to have a happy ending, and it actually kind of flips the script in that in many respects. I very successful.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, basically, just if we're talking about in general, any ending is possible, but if you make it work, right? So it's like, you know, I guess it's possible to have a happy ending to I Am Legend. It flips around what the story is supposed to be about, but, a big part of it was that they he came up with the the whatever serum at the last minute, and somehow it also worked that they got the serum to everyone else, and there's other humans out there somewhere.
All he needed to do was transfer his blood. Like that seemed like a simple process. He was the one that wasn't getting sick this whole time. Like maybe we should have looked into that, but fine.
Yeah.
I mean, they kind of ran out of time. I think.
I mean, that's what all I'm getting at is just that, like, it's definitely feels like the wrong choice for that movie. In general, the blanket statement that an ending has to be a bummer isn't necessarily true, but you do have to earn your ending, whichever way it goes.
Well, I think that's a good segue into our next film of one of the most bummer fucking endings ever, Night of the Living Dead. So, Night of the Living Dead, again, I'll probably say this on every episode that we're on, and we'll discuss it. I think Romero is the Scorsese of horror films. I think that he was fully independent, said fuck you to any sort of Hollywood studio or anything like that. He tried to go that route a little bit, but he said, no, I'm going to make my films and I'm going to make them the way I want to. And I think his, first 5 entries into his film catalog are some of the best horror films ever made. Night of the Living Dead, Jeremy and I were texting, while he was rewatching this, and he was saying how much it holds up. And I think that's because it's so poignant, and I think it's very transcendent, this storyline. This is unrest. This is the unknown, the fear of the unknown. This is isolation. This is everything that we will always fear for our entire lives as a human race, I believe. And this movie portrays that near flawlessly, in my opinion. As we're introduced to some folks that are holed up have to hold up in a farmhouse, what they think is a deserted farmhouse at the time, when one of them is attacked by a zombie that we actually see on screen, or the Walking Dead, a ghoul, whatever they are. I believe they say ghouls in this movie.
Right.
And so she's attacked with her brother.
They sort of explicitly, didn't take on the moniker of zombie in this movie. And in fact, in all of, or at least in the first 3 Romero zombie movies, they're only referred to as zombies once. One time, and that's in the second one.
Yep.
And it is only sort of in retrospect that we now sort of consider it a zombie classic.
Yes, exactly.
At the time, it wasn't that's not what a zombie was. A zombie was still this idea of what it was in White Zombie, where it's an automaton.
And in fact, the news reports in Night of the Living Dead, which, I mentioned this before, but I thought it was great that they created a global stage for this film while still sticking to one location, if you don't count the TV anchor and the news locations on the TV. Mm-hmm. But they created this as this giant global event that the U.S. government, the administration at the time, was working on to try to solve. The Army was involved. Local authorities, local governments were involved. This was a serious pandemic, and I feel like they nailed that through telling a small story but making it bigger.
And they nailed the perfectly American sense of how the state is totally incompetent, and everyone is on their own, and
right.
They really drove that home with that ending you're talking about or alluding to earlier. And, the thing that sort of typically happens in a horror movie or a monster movie from, let's say the 50s would be that, okay, we've discovered a new, large, cricket or whatever, and it's terrorizing the small town. And then we send in the army, and that fixes everything.
Yep.
And in this one, we see that general being sort of hounded by the reporters.
Mm-hmm. Which is Romero, I think.
What, the reporter, you mean?
Yeah, the report. Yeah. He's the reporter. He's the one hey, he's got the camera and all that stuff. I think that's Romero, yeah.
No, I think you're right. And, But he, essentially the general has no answers. And the authorities and the state apparatus, as it were, also has no answers. It's unlike the horror movies or monster movies from this era. This is not the solution, right?
Because this is getting out of the atomic age movies where
exactly,
the radioactive can be, or the radioactive issue based. The giant ants, the giant creatures are all easily vanquished because we know what the problem is, right? It's been testing, it's bomb testing. They created this, and the army can come in and clean house. But this, what the hell happened here? There's some. This is something that we can't control, and why can't we control it? Because anybody that you kill, or that dies, is going to become one of these things, apparently. So that means this army can be, well outnumbering the rest of the civilians that are still living on the planet, which you see in later Dead films.
I would say, at least in this one, it's not. I mean, definitely in Return of the Living Dead, that phenomenon is there, but in this one, it's not totally clear that how all this works. It's like, if you die in certain ways, you can come back, and then in others, I don't know what, they can feast on you, and then so like, for instance,
there are
the guy,
no rules.
Well, it's
not for the initial ones. I mean, how they started, there has been no explanation in these films. There's been no rule as to how they woke up, but moving forward, they spread the virus by biting or by scratching or whatever contact, blood. So that's how the virus spreads. But how did the virus originate?
Right.
How
So
did this...
like when the little girl kills her mom with the spade or whatever,
I hurt.
or the the little
Creepy
garden hoe. It's like somehow she gets infected to then come back to life. It's pretty clear that the way her dad gets it, he gets shot and then goes downstairs and gets snacked on by his daughter.
He's a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
Cooper.
then he come back to life based on that snacking. But I guess we didn't see mom get chewed on, and so when she comes back to life, it's like not super clear. But anyway,
we do though. We do see that. I think the girl is over both of the parents when we see them all at one time, and I think we see that she did in fact do that, and that's how she turned them.
Well, we definitely see her eating her dad's arm or whatever.
Yeah.
And we see her murder her mom.
Which is the second, and I just realized that's the second time they used tools.
in Night, or
yeah, in Night, because it's the cemetery zombie using the rock to get into the car with Judith O'Dea, Barbara.
Right. I see what you mean. Yeah,
and then this one is she used a pretty steady hand actually with the little hoe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a brutal kill. Speaking of that, like you brought that up, there's this was, you're talking about 1968. We're going into the realm of like the 70s and like the very graphic and violent movies that were coming out around that time. And George Romero was not afraid to show some on-screen gore in a film that came out in the 60s. And there's quite a bit.
So this one like fell right into this tiny pocket between the end of the code that didn't apply to White Zombie and the beginning of the MPAA. So essentially, those guardrails were removed. And so, seeing a totally decaying corpse with an eyeball popping out at the top of the stairs, they can do that.
Which was a ping pong ball.
Oh, really?
Romero actually made that thing himself.
Pretty convincing.
He was going to hire Savini, the guy that ended up doing Dawn of the Dead. Tom Savini, the big special makeup guy. He was going to be hired for this film, but he was in Vietnam at the time as a combat photographer, so he couldn't do it. But he brought him back for Dawn of the Dead. Right.
Mm-hmm. And didn't Savini direct the less than stellar remake of this?
Yeah. It's got its merits, I guess, but it's more.
And it's got Candyman, so that's nice.
Yeah, exactly. He's great. Tony Todd's awesome in that. But I think that, it's kind of like how Gus Van Sant tried to remake Psycho by going shot for shot.
Yeah.
This one, you can't recreate something like that. You have to do it your own way.
Right. And this movie, it captured this, sort of lightning in a bottle as this, this magical thing that, perhaps, shouldn't have worked on paper and, is rough around the edges at some points, but it's like being able to recreate the magic and the secret sauce there it's a fool's errand. You're not gonna be able to do it.
I agree. I mean, they've tried to do that several times with Night of the Living Dead. There's Savini's remake. they've shot extra footage and shoved it into the original. When it's like 30 years later, and they're gonna shove footage of the cemetery guy 30 years later that they've reshot into more scenes. It's like, that doesn't match.
Yeah.
And then there was this entire Night of the Living Dead like 3D that came out that was total remake. That was just this odd, like they added these strange police that were having goofy conversations about what's going on just to like add a little bit more to the story for no reason at all.
Yeah, that sounds like a no thanks.
Oh, it's terrible, yeah. So let's talk about some of these, some of the comparisons and stuff. Obviously, we're talking about how Night of the Living Dead was inspired by, is that what we're saying? Or straight up stole some of the shots and vibes from Last Man on Earth. There's clear tribute there that's being played. But White Zombie felt like its own thing in terms of like the way that it was shot and lit and
Well,
it had more of a stagey feel to it.
Yes, for sure. It felt it was adapted from a stage play. It kind of but I don't even think the theater aspect of it could explain why the performances were so wooden and stilted and weird. But the concept that the movie had of what a zombie was, this automaton that's controlled by a puppet master, was a template for how zombies were portrayed for decades. And in retrospect, Night of the Living Dead broke that mold and changed it to something else, where it's like, as in Night, there's no puppet master. There's very little explanation as to how this event is happening. It seems more or less spontaneous, and now it's just something you have to deal with, versus being able to take out the puppet master and release all of the puppets from their cursed spell or whatever, which is how sort of zombies were portrayed up to that point. Mm-hmm. And so, White Zombie, it's sort of closer to the origin of zombies.
Like Haitian religion and
yeah, exactly.
Voodoo.
And how, West African religions were then morphed into their own thing in what we now call Haiti, what then was called Saint-Domingue. And voodoo played quite an important role in how even the country was established. A lot of the rebellions that took place that led to the country being created, Haiti being created, and like the, getting rid of the French, both getting rid of slavery and colonialism at the same time. That all kind of started with a voodoo ceremony. Anyway, so it comes out of that culture. The White Zombie takes place in Haiti, and in that sense, the idea of zombies as these automatons is sort of tied to the islands in a way, and throughout later iterations, it was still kind of connected to that. Mm-hmm. And again, not at the time, not in 1968, but later on, sort of in retrospect, when we started considering Night of the Living Dead a zombie movie, it sort of erased where that came from and kind of created its own version of that. And
which technically they were the flesh eaters when they were originally going for the title. That they didn't really have, they were just some form of human that was eating flesh, and that was like their main motivation was to eat.
Yeah, definitely. They were flesh eating ghouls or whatever.
Yeah,
the term zombie was sort of retconned onto it. It didn't actually start that way. It wasn't the intention. It's again, not until much later that what we see in Night of the Living Dead we consider to be zombies. Part of it was in Dawn, they did say that and explicitly make that connection.
But that connection was made because the main character had a voodoo witch doctor for a grandfather.
Oh,
and
right.
his grandfather named them zombies. And the way that he described it is, he's like, if we open those doors, there's going to be 1,000 zombies in here. That's what he says over the radio. But previously in the movie, he says, my grandfather was, a witch doctor in Haiti. So obviously that's where he as the character got the moniker zombie from, because that's, the origin of that. Right. So I think that was him as a character comparing what's going on in the world to something that was, from his grandfather's, stories and things he told him as he was growing up.
I see. And then sort of the Italian distribution of that movie was called Zombie, and then they made sort of a mockbuster sequel to it in Italy. And then sort of it became in pop culture, okay, well, this is what a zombie is.
Yeah.
It's like having sort of, erased both the 30s definition of a zombie and like sort of the original definition of a zombie before that.
Now they are just walking creatures, very little motivation other than to feed, can be easily killed with a shot to the head. Like there were a lot of rules and checkboxes that were put in place for these versions when, as we saw in White Zombie, I don't think they could be killed. I don't think, outside of obviously throwing someone over a cliff into raging waters, I think that was the only way that anyone actually died in that film. Like none of the zombies could be killed. They were shot.
Or I guess getting dumped into the, cane shredder or whatever that was.
There you go. Yeah. So if you mangle their body, so that's the Evil Dead way of doing it. You had to dismember the body in order to kill them.
Right.
But Last Man on Earth he was just burning the bodies, right?
Yes.
And in order for them not to come back, he was throwing them into the fire pit. Night of the Living Dead, that's when we started establishing, well, at the end of the film, when we start finding out some of those rules, just shoot him in the head. That should take care of him good.
Mm-hmm.
Chief, if I were surrounded by 6 or 8 of these things, would I stand a chance with them?
Well, there's no problem. If you had a gun, shoot him in the head. That's a sure way to kill him. If you don't, get yourself a club or a torch. Beat him or burn him. They go up pretty easy.
There was that statement that Romero was making that, and he made it again in Dawn, that he calls them the hillbillies, but the locals from these small rural towns, they loved this shit, and they ate it up, and this was their way to kind of get out and fire their guns and to be part of this, project to help clean up their own state. But really, this was their way to hunt some humans. And you'll really see that in Dawn. There's a whole montage that's specifically related to that and the army, and it's really powerful.
Yeah, and I guess that's where the sort of legend of zombies and like the way in which they're portrayed in popular culture, where it ends up going, with sort of the ultimate expression of that being the Walking Dead and like the uber popularity of that. And there's this fantasy element of like, wouldn't it be great if, all of the pressures and terrible things you have to deal with, bills and your boss treating you like shit and, the kids complaining and whatever. It's like all that can be totally simplified, and your whole world is all the constructs of the world, dealing with traffic and whatever else is totally thrown out the window. And now your life has so much purpose because every day you just get up and have to destroy zombies and continue to survive, and you're living a very meaningful life. Whereas before it was hard to find that sort of satisfaction and purpose, which, again, thinking of the roots of what a zombie actually was, which is like, slavery in San Domingue was, particularly heinous. I mean, obviously that's saying a lot, but the legend of a zombie was a way to have sort of these middlemen between the actual slaveholders and the workers. These middlemen would kind of control them and help. And some of them, they would be voodoo priests who would help prevent people from killing themselves. Because if you did that, you wouldn't be able to be taken to what is more or less heaven in this religion.
Right.
And then your body could then be used as a slave after death. So it was the worst fate they could possibly imagine, because life was a living hell. And so they didn't want their afterlife to be that, so they would, stay alive to avoid that fate, right? So you go from what that concept was to it being a total relief from the day-to-day banality of existence in 2013 idea of how The Walking Dead and how that became like kind of an escapism at that time. It's pretty sort of fascinating to unpack all that, especially just given that as we were talking about a minute ago, the origins of all this stuff was sort of just wiped off the slate, and it was mostly just like, oh well, there's just an infinite amount of bad guys and automatons, and it's like a video game, and you can just kind of blow them away and not have to have any concerns about the morality of what you're doing, because these are just waves and waves of monsters, and so it becomes this like fun fantasy or whatever that then it again like it erases everything that came before that.
Just to look back at some of the themes in these movies. I mean, while we touch on the themes of isolationism and things. I mean, White Zombie hit me hard, especially again with the times that we're going through right now. I mean, the subtext of slavery was extremely strong in this. I wouldn't even call it subtext, as I would call it just in your face. The scene in which the automatons, the zombies in this film, were working in the sugarcane mill was literally one of the most terrifying images I've seen on film. Soulless and emotionless faces walking around in this low angle around this wheel, and it gave the impression that this machine never stopped, and it just would keep going until either these walking zombies, I guess, deteriorated or fell apart, and they'd find new ones, or they fell into the sugarcane thing. I know, like you'd mentioned that you wanted to bring this up later, but like you said, this was a good segue into that, and I think it's a theme that we shouldn't brush off.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it seemed like it would be somewhere to kind of like lead us into the future of zombies, but it worked here in this point anyway. And as we were discussing, it's like the whole idea of this little series is where did this monster, this classic movie monster that everyone knows and has a vague idea of, well, where did it really come from, and how did we get to that idea? And Night of the Living Dead, obviously huge watershed for that as a genre of a monster. White Zombie in its own way was that at the time. Last Man on Earth didn't have that sort of effect on popular culture, but it did in so much as it inspired Night of the Living Dead to then have the monsters sort of act the way they did in that movie. And as we'll see in sort of our next couple episodes, the other sort of fence posts in the evolution of this thing, but then sort of slightly more refine and redefine what a zombie is, until it kind of gets to its more or less final form in the 80s.
Well, Jeremy, that was an excellent summation that leads us into our next episode. I think we should call it there. This was a good discussion, and I really loved each of these films. Obviously, I've always loved Night of the Living Dead. Seeing White Zombie finally for the first time was, something I've been wanting to do for a long time. Last Man on Earth is legendary, no pun intended, but it very much is. A book that has inspired so many artists. The Richard Matheson book, I mean. Right. That book has inspired so many auteurs later on, Stephen King, George Romero, etc., to create these, larger than life worlds that are, the world basically becomes our biggest enemy without any real warning to us at all. Everything can just turn and change, and I think that each one of these films, well, especially Last Man on Earth and Night of the Living Dead, all speak to what we're all experiencing right now in 2020. Hopefully it doesn't end up as bummer as some of these movies do. However, I'm not totally hopeful. But I'm trying to keep a fresh perspective on things and just going to enjoy these films for what they are as entertainment, and not try to take them so damn seriously as I have in the past, and I have been now.
I guess even with the bummer ending of the movie, at least the movie comes to an end, and it's not just part of your daily grind as you're just describing there, and it's like in that sense it does. You're allowed to escape it.
I like when like at the end of Last Man on Earth, and I believe at White Zombie 2, it actually says the end,
right.
and that's nice. I'd like for that to happen. For the coronavirus, and maybe our current administration. I'd like to see a big the end
there you go.
At some point. But thanks so much for listening, everybody. And Jeremy, thank you so much for a great conversation. We watched White Zombie, The Last Man on Earth, and Night of the Living Dead. Next episode, we will be watching Dawn of the Dead, also known as Zombie in Italy, and Zombie 2, Lucio Fulci's film, but is also called Zombie in the U.S. If that was confusing to you, tune in. Yeah, tune in next week, and we'll clear all that up, hopefully. But thanks so much, and we'll be back with our next episode.
See you then.
Another day to live through. Better get started. Is that all it has been since I inherited the world? Only 3 years. Seems like 100 million.